It's Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance in San Diego County. Today we are joined by Andrea Guerrero. She is the Executive Director of Alliance San Diego. On the ballot in San Diego County will be 12, 13, 14 measures for all county voters to consider. One measure is known as Measure K, and I want to talk about that measure with you if that's okay.
Would love to.
Let's start from the beginning and talk about how elections were held before 1989 for contested races where humans were running, as opposed to measures, for example. What was the rule? What were the rules back then?
Well, initially we had partisan races,
right,
and we elected people citywide. And because we wanted to increase our democracy, we wanted to strengthen our democracy, we made some reforms, some common sense reforms that turned partisan elections at the local level into nonpartisan elections.
That was the progressive era. That was,
Right.
100 years ago, Hiram
Right.
Johnson.
And then we also, we converted our general elections to district elections. So now when you go to vote for your city council member, only the people in that city council
Right.
district vote on that individual.
So let's talk specifics. I think it's interesting for nerds like myself. So we had the progressive era, like you said. That was about 100 years ago, Hiram Johnson, where we went nonpartisan for local races. Before 1989, at least in San Diego County, the way it worked is in the primary, there were districts. And the people in those districts voted for the candidates. But then when the general election occurred, because the top two would advance, when the general election occurred, the entire city voted.
That's correct.
So that's how it was in 89, pre-89. Now that's changed. What's the law today?
Today, in the city of San Diego, when we elect the mayor, city attorney, and city council candidates, voters go to the polls in June, and if a candidate wins in June with more than 50% of the vote, regardless of how many people turn out, then they win outright. They do not advance to a runoff in November. We're very concerned about that because we only have a fraction of the voters participating in June.
Let's talk about that. And to be clear, so like we said, there are all district elections, and if someone gets 50% plus one, they win outright. If not, they advance to a general, and top two advance, but the whole city doesn't vote like if they did pre-89.
No,
it's
that's
that
right.
district.
That's right. Just the district votes for the candidate in that district.
So let's talk about Measure K, because that is the reform measure which the Alliance is supporting. And it would change the way we would elect based upon primary and general elections. Explain what Measure K would do.
Measure K is a common sense reform that ensures that we're making the big decisions on our city leaders when the most voters are participating, and that's in the November election. So it would require a runoff for the November election so that all of us can participate in the decision about who our city leaders will be.
So let's break that down. Just as a reminder, let's say I'll give you a scenario. There are 5 candidates, and one of those 5 candidates gets 52% of the vote. What would happen under the current law?
Under the current law, that individual would win outright in June. They would not go to a runoff.
And it is a historical fact that in primary elections, we see fewer voters than in general elections.
That's right. We see as few as 20% of voters participating in the June primary, and that is because it is called a primary, it is
Right.
preliminary, and at the state level and the federal level, we don't make our final decisions in the primaries. We make them in the general elections in November.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, as you know, the voters passed some initiatives a couple of years ago, which creates an open primary.
Mm-hmm.
And so even for partisan elections, not presidential primaries, but for partisan elections, the top 2 candidates will advance,
That's right.
regardless of party, even if one of those candidates got 50% plus 1.
That's right. And so we want to align the city rules with the state rules to eliminate the confusion and maximize the participation on the big decisions that matter to all of us.
Let's talk about cost, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because presumably if you hold a second election, there's a cost to that. Is that accurate?
There is a cost. It's a nominal cost. The cost would be a few cents per voter in every election cycle. And that is a very reasonable cost for a well-functioning democracy.
Could one argue, though, that, democracy is ugly in the best sense? We love our democracy. And if voters make the decision not to vote in June, they do it at their peril. And if someone does get that majority, why require another round?
Because we want a well-functioning democracy. We know that when more voters participate, we get better decisions. And we know that turnout in November doubles over turnout in June.
If not more.
If not more.
Right.
And we also know that it triples for voters of color, and it multiplies times 5 for young voters, right? So there's a lot of confusion about the June election, and that is part of the reason why voters are not participating in June. The reality is, if we want to make decisions when the most people are participating, that is clearly in November, and that's what we want to do.
And this is just the city of San Diego. This is not the county.
That's right. This is the city of San Diego that we want to align with the state election rules so that there's no confusion. Everybody understands there's a runoff for everybody.
What happens if there are only 2 candidates that file under Measure K? Is there an outright winner in June, or they still need to advance to November?
No, they advance to November, and they run before the full electorate. So part of this is about accountability to the voters, right? When you are elected by only a fraction of the voters in June, you only feel accountable to that fraction. You've only had a conversation with a small number of people. By running all the way to November, you're having a much broader conversation, and you're accountable to a much larger electorate.
I think with boards of supervisors races, if only 2 candidates run in June, the one who gets 50% plus 1 wins. If there are 3 candidates and one gets 50%, they win. So this would be more like the state model than the Board of Supervisors model.
No, absolutely. This would be aligning city rules with state rules to eliminate confusion and make sure that we're all participating in the big decision.
And I would mention that there's also a measure on the ballot, Measure L. We won't get into the weeds on it, but it also moves measures from primary to general election ballots.
That's right. It moves citizen initiatives to the November ballot, and that's what we do at the state level.
Right. I was going to ask that because
Yes.
that was a law signed by Governor Brown in the last few years.
That's right. And so, again, it's to eliminate confusion, align city rules with state rules, and make sure that we're making the big decisions on both candidates and measures when the most people participate.
For nerds like us, I hope I can call you a nerd. This is interesting.
I'm a nerd.
This is interesting, but it's a bit inside baseball. And so, but I ask you that because are you, as an advocate, able to kind of get the word out about this? Because I get the arguments. And so if you're not really a student of politics, general, primary, what does this mean? Talk to me about talking to the voters.
Sure. So that's what Alliance San Diego does. We talk to voters. In fact, we're talking to voters now.
Right. You talk right here. Right.
Here
Yeah, right.
and in the field.
Sure.
We have canvas teams out on the ground, and they're talking to voters. And I can tell you what we're hearing, and that is that this sounds like a common sense reform that we know from our own surveys and other surveys that have been done that most voters do not know that decisions become final in June. They think they have a second chance in November.
And considering the state does it that way, I can see why there'd be that confusion.
That's right.
Her name is Andrea Guerrero. She is the executive director of Alliance San Diego. She comes to us speaking in support of Measure K on the San Diego City ballot. My name is Brad Pomerance, coming to you from San Diego County. This is Local Edition.